G'day there. You're watching the Aussie BIM Guru, and today we're following up our previous lesson on classes by learning about interfaces. Now, we're not going to go too in-depth on interfaces, just teach you enough that you understand the concept and that you can implement them basically in your add-in. So the goal today is we'll introduce the concept, but we'll show you how you can actually implement a couple in the context of your add-in project. So interfaces effectively are abstract templates that classes must adhere to some of the properties and methods they're provided with. So in this case, if we look at an example of an interface such as IAnimal, which is a very common example people use, we can prescribe various properties that an animal must have if it implements this interface. For example, an animal must have legs, it must have a name, it must have the ability to make a noise in a method. When we actually implement this interface in the context of a class, we can more specifically set and prescribe the values of these properties, but we can also set the behavior of these methods as well. So in this case, this is where we refer to an interface as abstract because it doesn't have to specify the behaviors or the values of these. It just says that they have to have them. So this can be used as a way to guide various classes towards certain templates you wish for them to share with other classes. But a very important thing about interfaces in the context of the Revit API is that they often provide us a provision of arguments, things that we wouldn't usually be able to access very quickly or easily. For example, we're going to be implementing two interfaces today, and both of them will give us access to things like the application, or they might trigger things on events like Revit starting. And these are things we can't usually intercept or pick up very easily without a lot of code. So the interfaces will help simplify the process of responding to events and collecting very foreign properties or objects that we wouldn't usually have direct access to. So we're going to be using some variants of applications and documents throughout our add-in. I'm very quickly just going to show you all of them that we'll be using. The first one is the UI controlled application class. And in this case, this gives us access to the Revit application, specifically when it's starting up and shutting down, when there's not a lot of other things available to us, which will let us at least construct our ribbon before we've actually started Revit properly and started working in documents. As well as this, we have the controlled application, which will more specifically give us access to Revit outside of when we're starting up and shutting down, and also very broad settings that the application has, such as the language it's following. We also have the UI application, which we'll be using a lot. In this case, it's available during the session, unlike startup and shutdown, and will give us further access to the document that we're working in currently as well. We then have variants of document. So in this case, we have the UI document class. In this case, this will give us access to Revit at an interface level. Will give us access to things like the ability to select things or get our selection and check which views are opened, amongst other things as well. And probably the most important one is our document class, which in this case will give us access to our current document, which will allow us to implement the Revit API in a lot of interesting ways. For example, the ability to collect elements in that document. How do we access them? Well, we're going to get access to a few of them through interface. So in this case, the UI controlled application will be provided to us through the interface of the startup and shutdown procedure that the IExternalApplication interface gives us access to. As well as this, we can get and store the controlled application using the controlled application property of the UI controlled application object. From here, we're going to be looking at this in the next video most likely, but you can access the UI application during this process as well, but you have to start what's called an idling event, so that when it's first available, you can take the UI application from the idling event, which provides this. So we'll look at this in the next video. It is a little bit complicated, but it will give us the ability to assign the UI application to a global variable that we can then always access in our add-in whilst Revit is open. From there, the UI document can be accessed through the UI application as the active UI document property, and from there, the document itself can be provided through the UI document through the document property. So they very much give you access to each other for the most part. So this is sort of the cascading hierarchy. And we're going to be using these at various points during our add-in specifically, depending on what we're doing in Revit at the time. So we're going to do a quick demonstration. This is a fairly quick video today because this is quite an important little step to take in making your add-in more closely resemble a typical one. But we're firstly going to be implementing the IExternalApplication interface to get the startup and the shutdown method of the Revit application. We're also going to be using the IExternalCommand interface to set up a basic command that we can eventually assign to a button on a ribbon that we create. We're going to show you how you can collect the controlled application during the startup procedure, as well as also collecting the document when you're running a command. But we're actually going to implement these in a future video once we begin constructing a ribbon, so we can actually run our toolbar and press buttons and trigger commands. And from there, we're really going to start building our commands more specifically. So I'm just going to jump over to Visual Studio. In this case, I'm just going to jump into Guru, my demo toolbar, and I'm honestly just going to be probably deleting nearly all of this. Now, this is a external application interface provided through the NicePoint template, and I think it's great that obviously the template provides a lot of utility, but in this case, I'm going to be teaching wherever I can using the standard native Revit API classes instead. We are going to be looking at this a little bit later when we build a command. This is a attribute. So you can assign attributes to classes, which will modify generally the behavior of how they work. And we're going to be using that to set the mode of the transactions that we undertake when running a command. But we'll come back to that in a sec. So the most important thing we have here is our namespace, which is our top namespace, in this case Guru, or whatever you've chosen to call your specific namespace. I'm going to get rid of the NicePoint reference, and we're going to be beginning by implementing the IExternalApplication interface. So let's have a quick look at it in the Revit API docs. So I'll just jump over to, I'm already on it. So in this case, the interface will expect two methods, on shutdown and on startup. And we can see that the on startup method provides access to the UI controlled application. So this is the entry point to Revit and to the add-in as well, because the UI controlled application will give us the ability to create ribbons, add push buttons to it, and effectively build our toolbar before we start running it more specifically. So in order to implement this interface, I'm firstly going to declare a public class called application. And this is my application.cs class. As well as this, I need an interface. So I'm going to call on the IExternalApplication as my interface. I then need to encapsulate, and I now need to specify those two methods that the interface expects. So in this case, we can see that we're being told the application doesn't currently interface these two interface members. So in this case, I don't believe I'm going to necessarily have a fix automatically available, but I can start populating this and the interface should sort of help me through that. So first of all, we need to return a result from the on startup method. And we just need to say, sorry, on startup. And this specific method is going to require a UI controlled application, which we're going to call UI controlled app. And at this point, we also need to return value from this on startup method. We can see the return type is expected as a result. Now, something you might have noticed happened while I was typing this is this using Revit UI popped up the top. So there's a little bit of intelligence going on here. My ribbon is recognizing I'm using a class from the Revit.ui namespace. So I need to use that namespace. You can see that's automatically happened already. Pretty cool, right? But I need to actually just for now return result succeeded. So result has a few pathways. If we go back a step, you'll see we've got cancelled, failed, and succeeded. Generally, you're going to be using cancelled and succeeded quite a lot, not using failed so much, because failed will generally try to roll back the command if we use it. So I tend to say succeeded unless the user actively cancels it. But the goal of our on startup method is to finish with a result that is successful, because that is the end of the construction of our toolbar when Revit launches. So we now can see we've lost this warning that said we don't have an on startup method. We're following the interface's guidance. As well as this, I need a public result on shutdown. And in this case, we can see that it's recognizing that it's going to provide UI controlled application. And it's knowing that we want to return a successful result again. Now in this case, I believe this is actually a lowercase d as well. There we go. And we can see we've now satisfied the contract with our interface. We provided the startup and the shutdown method. Generally, the shutdown method is more about cleaning up when Revit is closing. So if you subscribe to events, you can unsubscribe to them just to be clean. But in this case, we have the framework of our application at this point. Now we actually have the UI controlled application available through the interfaces method already. It's been provided to us. So if we wanted to, we can collect the controlled application, which we'll call CTL app. In this case, we can call on the controlled application, and we now have access to the controlled application during our onStartup method as well. So this is going to give us pretty much everything we need to construct our toolbar. Now, before we finish, one thing I haven't really shown how to do yet in C# is how to add comments to things and clean up things. So let's just use the // and this is a comment. So we can say this application belongs to the root namespace. We can then say implementing the interface. I think I just hit a shortcut by accident there. Something's trying to build, which we don't want. And we can also say that this will run on startup, and this will run on shutdown. So we're going to leave the command, the application area for now and come back to this in our next lesson when we build a ribbon. But what we can also do is implement a command interface. We don't actually need this guru commands either. What I like to do is label the usings with Autodesk for Autodesk, Guru for my specific libraries, and System for anything that comes from the system libraries. Okay, so we're going to go and restructure our commands a little bit. So what I like to do is put subfolders in here. And generally these subfolders are going to be the names of the panels in your toolbar. So in this case, let's just say our first panel is probably going to be called General. Now I'm just checking, oh, there's the debugger running in the background. We don't want that. There we go. So let's just say General. And I'm going to move this command into General. It's going to say, generally it might take a long time, but it won't. You can adjust the namespace if you want. We're going to come and change this anyway. But typically I like to make each section from this point generally like a pull down that holds various commands together. So we're going to look at this in the next video, but I generally like to use what's called pull downs, which are like buttons you click with more buttons in them to save space. So generally I prefix these with CMDS for commands. And let's just say the first pull down is going to be a general pull down. I'll just say yes to this, but we're going to go into the command file now and have a look at it. Now we can see also that we're using an external command interface from the nice point template currently, which again, we're not going to use in this case. We're going to use something a little bit different. So in this case, we're just probably going to firstly refactor this to match our folder. So we're going to call this guru.commands general. It's important to note that I'm using commands instead of command as my name. So it's obvious this holds various commands together. Now in this case, we're going to be implementing a different interface. So I'm just going to go back to this point. We don't need this used implicitly attribute. But if you're ever running a transaction to change the document, you're going to need to provide this attribute to your command, which will instruct the command. It will have the ability to modify the document. When in doubt, just provide this anyway, just in case you ever decide to let your command change the document, because it will be necessary. So in this case, we've got a summary. So we'll just come back to this later. Example command. We no longer need these references for now. So now that we have our transaction mode set, I think we actually need some of those references. I think it's the attributes, Revit attributes that will provide access to the transaction attribute. So from here, we're going to make a command class. So we're going to say public class. I'm going to call this command test. Again, we're going to implement, in this case, we're going to implement the IExternalCommand interface. Let's go over to the API docs and have a quick look at that. And see what the IExternalCommand interface expects. And we should find it only expects one method. which is the execute method, which is going to provide command data, a message, and some elements. Now, in this case, we're not really going to be dealing with the element set in most cases, but we can have a look at more information about what they are. So in this case, we can see there's going to be some command data, which will provide access to the application and the view, which is very important. We can see there's an element set, which will indicate elements that are encountered as problematic in the case of trying to run the command. And we can also have a string that can be returned as well, but we're generally not going to be using these. We're just mostly going to be using the command data, but we still need to specify all of them. So I'm just going to copy and paste this, which is going to be easier for us to implement. And I'm going to say, in this case, we have a public, and the return type is result, execute. And I think I'll just paste what I had before to avoid me having to write it out over and over again. There we go. And if we return result succeeded, we should satisfy the contract with the interface as well. Now, I think in this case, I've got something wrong here. There's a typo maybe. Just checking what's going on there. I think we need to do a ref string as well. Yeah, so we've got it needs to be a ref string, not an out string. And I believe that should satisfy the contract. And there we go. We have a completed contract with a command that will run when we press a button. Now, the good news is you don't really need to understand a great deal about the interface. You just need to make sure you implement it and it does all the heavy lifting for you. So typically, one thing you'll commonly be doing with a command like this is beginning your command by collecting some aspects of the document you're currently working in. So I'm just going to have a look at that typical entry point. Again, we're just going to say associate with general commands. I'm going to tell this is Autodesk. We'll just leave this as example command for now. And we'll I don't usually put a comment above the interface execute method because it's the only one it has. But in this case, let's just begin by actually collecting. So we're going to actually collect the document. Now we're going to do this in a few steps. First of all, we're going to collect the UI application. So I'm going to declare it explicitly first. And I'm going to say that we want our command data. And we can see that we're being specified to specify the application property. And we can double check that is the UI application. So this command data argument through the interface gives us access to the UI application, which is a very direct and convenient way to access this. Once we have this, we can get a UI doc or UI document. And as we said before, that is going to be the active UI document property of the UI application. Finally, we can collect the document using UI.document. And this will give us access to the document that we can do various things to in our application whilst running this command. There's going to be obviously some code logic here, which is where we'll actually execute our command, and then finally the final return. Now, the command is a special type of class. You can return early. It's basically a method we're running here. So you can return succeeded, cancelled, all sorts of conditions throughout this command's execution, which is going to allow us to do a lot of really convenient control flow, where we can add cancellation points, we can process forms and use their outcomes to stop and start and navigate our way through this command's code. But effectively, this is the framework of a command established for us at this point. We can create more of them in the same space by just copying and under the namespace pasting an extra command. In this case, it has to be a different name, but otherwise can be exactly the same. So we can see we have a command and we have a test command. And if I expand this, I can see I have command test and command test 2. And later on, we're going to be hooking these up in the next lesson to actual buttons on the toolbar so that these run when we press the button. So that's effectively today's lesson wound up. Fairly basic, but very imperative to how we step into the next stage. So we now have a basic understanding of what an interface is and how we can implement a couple of them provided by the Revit API and how we can access the application classes and the document classes. But in the next video, we will actually be starting to build our ribbon where we can eventually attach these commands to our add-in. So if you're keen to learn more or see how this is implemented in a more detailed add-in, feel free to check out my GitHub where I have an add-in called GWiz that shows a completed add-in that has a lot of these techniques implemented as well. Thanks for watching today. If you like what you saw, feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and let other people know about the series if you think it's useful to them. And you can reach me at the email there or in the comments below. And I look forward to seeing you in future similar videos. Thanks. Take care. Bye.